Lima, June 24th, 1716. Flames consume 14 bodies, while a woman watches in silence. Her name is Esperanza, and what she is witnessing is the culmination of 6 years of perfect planning. 14 landowners, the cruelest in the viceroyalty of Peru, burn alive tied to a charcoal pyre. Their screams awaken the entire valley, but it is too late to save them. If you want to know real stories that changed the course of America, subscribe and hit the bell icon. This story is documented in historical archives that reveal the most perfect revenge ever executed. This is not fiction. Documents from the General Archive of the Indies confirm every detail. Esperanza achieved the impossible. She organized the simultaneous execution of her oppressors using only intelligence, patience, and knowledge of natural poisons. As a slave with no formal education or resources, she accomplished something that would challenge the best military strategists. The answer lies in a story that began 14 years earlier, when a slave ship docked in Callao with a human cargo that included a 16-year-old girl destined to change history. Lima in 1716 was the heart of Spanish power in South America. Its vice-regal palaces contrasted brutally with the huts where the slaves who worked on the sugarcane plantations were crowded. The slave system was not just economic, it was a death machine where African life was worth less than a tool. The 14 men burning this dawn were not chosen at random. Rodrigo Mendoza y Figueroa, owner of San Pedro, inventor of tortures that combined physical pain with psychological humiliation. Antonio de Ulloa y Contreras, owner of La Esperanza, famous for his experiments with red-hot irons. Fernando de Cáceres, obsessed with separating families to improve the bloodline. Diego de Alvarado, who turned tortures into Sunday spectacles. Each name represents decades of systematic atrocities. Every flame that consumes them collects a blood debt accumulated over generations. Esperanza not only planned their deaths, she planned for them to be conscious of what was happening, for them to feel the absolute terror they had inflicted on thousands of innocents. The pyre is built with charcoal extracted by 5-year-old slave children, the same charcoal that fueled the sugar mills where dozens died every month. The irony is perfect. The instruments of their wealth become the instruments of their destruction. The screams cease at 5:33 a.m. 14 of the continent's most powerful men have been executed by a woman who arrived chained from Africa, who lost her son due to the cruelty of these same men, who transformed her pain into the most sophisticated revenge in American history. When the smoke dissipates, only ashes remain, which will be scattered in the Rimac River. Not even their bones will find rest in sacred ground. But the true revolution is not in the flames. It is in the message it sends to every slave on the continent. Perfect revenge is possible when planned with intelligence and executed with surgical precision. To understand how we arrived at this dawn of justice, we must know the story of the woman who made it possible. A story that began on the coasts of Africa and ended up forever transforming power relations in colonial America. Port of Callao, October 17, 02. The galleon San Francisco unloads its human cargo, 236 African survivors of a voyage that began with 320. The 84 who lie at the bottom of the Atlantic had better luck than those who are now examined like cattle in the Pacific's cruelest market. Among them walks a 16-year-old girl with something others have lost: intact dignity in her eyes. The traders classify her as a prime pieza de Indias for 90 silver pesos. For history, she will simply be Esperanza, a name imposed at her forced baptism. Don Rodrigo Mendoza y Figueroa examines hair as one would a mule. Teeth, muscles, physical endurance. He is satisfied with the investment. He does not suspect that he has just bought his own death. The journey to the San Pedro hacienda reveals the landscape that will be her prison. The majestic Andes to the east, the desert to the west, and between them, the Rimac Valley with its plantations that have enriched Creole families with African blood. The hacienda stretches for 1,000 hectares of sugarcane fields that undulate like a green sea, hiding the suffering of hundreds of souls. The master's house, with carved balconies and courtyards with fountains, contrasts obscenely with the adobe huts where the slaves are crammed. The first day establishes the routine that will be repeated for years. Waking before dawn, watery corn porridge, 16 hours cutting cane under relentless sun, dinner of stale beans, collapsing on mats shared with other families. This historical reconstruction is based on real documents from Callao. Share so more people can learn the true history of African resistance in America. But Esperanza observes more than just suffering. It's more than she sees the master's routines, the overseer's weaknesses, moments of vulnerability that she mentally archives without a clear purpose yet. Her mind photographs every injustice, every humiliation, every drop of blood spilled. Don Rodrigo's punishment system combines Spanish tradition with personal cruelty. 50 lashes for being late, 100 for breaking tools, 200 for attempting to escape. But there are worse punishments. The stocks under a scorching sun, branding with red-hot irons, slow death by starvation in underground cells. During her first months, she witnesses executions that scar her soul forever. Tomas, who arrived on the same ship, whipped to death for defending a woman from systematic rapes. Maria Guadalupe, a Creole born on the hacienda, branded on the face for stealing bread for her sick child. 5-year-old children forced to work 14 hours with no right to be children. Each atrocity is etched into her memory with surgical precision. Every perpetrator's name is archived for an uncertain but inevitable future. Unbeknownst to them, she is building a list of debtors that she will one day collect with interest. Her forced marriage to Sebastian, an Angolan slave, is decided by Don Rodrigo to improve the race and guarantee new workers. It is another humiliation in an endless chain, but also an opportunity to establish alliances that will be crucial years later. Domestic work in the master's house is considered a privilege, but Esperanza discovers it is just another hell. More frequent rapes, more refined humiliations, but also access to privileged information. She overhears conversations of landowners, learns their plans, understands how the system that keeps them in power works. One afternoon, serving Don Rodrigo and his guests, she hears for the first time the names she will years later write on her list of revenge. Antonio de Ulloa boasts of killing 5 slaves for a non-existent conspiracy. Fernando de Cáceres describes with laughter how he branded a pregnant woman who asked for food. Diego de Alvarado recounts how he forced a father to whip his son to death. That night, gazing at the Andean stars, something is born in her soul, the certainty that these men will pay for every drop of blood spilled. She does not know how or when, but she knows she will be the one to collect that debt. The seed of revenge has been planted in fertile ground. The heart of a woman who has lost everything, except the determination to achieve justice. She only needs time and patience for it to grow into the fire that will consume her enemies. 1704 to 1710, 6 years, where each dawn brings the same question: how can such cruel beings exist? The answer is simple and terrible, because they can do so without consequences. Until now, the routine is relentless. 4 a.m. Bronze bell that breaks the silence. Watery corn gruel that must fuel 16 hours of work. Scorching sun cutting 5 tons of cane daily. Hands that constantly bleed, wounds that get infected, but there is no time to heal. Whoever stops receives 50 lashes. Esperanza develops mental routines to survive. While cutting cane, her mind travels. She remembers Africa, her grandmother's stories about warrior gods who punished the wicked. But she also observes, always observes. Every gesture of her oppressors is archived, every routine analyzed, every weakness cataloged. She learns traditional medicine, combining African knowledge with local plants. She prepares coca infusions for pain, poultices for infected wounds, concoctions for lethal diarrheas. But her true education is observing human behavior under extreme pressure. She sees how some slaves betray companions seeking favors. She sees how others take refuge in madness. And she sees how a few maintain their dignity intact, fueling flames of rebellion that never extinguish. Among these is Joaquín del Ingenio, who teaches her that revenge must be calculated, not blind. Also Catalina, a veteran who knows the secrets of the master's house. Which doors creak, what hiding places exist, what the master's intimate routines are. She teaches her that information is power, that an observant slave can be more dangerous than 100 armed men. These methods of resistance are documented in the archives of the Holy Office. Like this video if this real story is impacting you, and comment what you think about these historical events. 1706 marks a crucial point. Miguel, her son is born. Don Rodrigo permits the name in honor of the Saint of Warriors. The birth occurs in her room, without a doctor, without medicine, without clean water. But the child is born strong, with powerful lungs and his mother's bright eyes. Motherhood under slavery defies description. She loves Miguel with surprising intensity, but knows that this love is a vulnerability her enemies will exploit. Slave children belong to the master from birth. They can be sold, given away, or killed according to the owner's will. Miguel grows up too fast. 3 years tending pigs, 5 years cutting sugarcane like an adult. His childhood doesn't exist. It is only training for a life of suffering that ends in death. During these years, Esperanza witnesses events that mark her transformation. 1707. Tomasa asks to visit her sick mother. The request is treated as insolence. She is subjected to brutal punishment meant to break not just her body, but everyone's will. Don Rodrigo forbids medical help, so her suffering will stand as an example. Tomasa does not survive. From then on, Esperanza understands that on this land, compassion isn't merely absent, it is actively punished. 1708. Aurelio is 50 and has spent 30 years working the hacienda. He is publicly punished for doing the unthinkable, teaching his grandson to read. The mark they leave on him is permanent, meant to shame him as much as to injure him. He keeps working anyway, carrying the wound like a sentence until he dies 2 years later. 1709. The trauma that seals everything. Carmen, Esperanza's closest friend, who arrived on the same ship, is accused of stealing bread for her sick child. The punishment is slow, deliberate cruelty. She is locked away and denied even the most basic necessities. Esperanza hears her cries and cannot reach her. Carmen dies pleading for water. Her son dies days later from the illness she tried to fight. After Carmen's death, something in Esperanza changes for good. She holds 3-year-old Miguel and makes a decision that will shape the rest of her life. Someone will answer for every drop of blood, every stolen breath, every life ground down into nothing. She doesn't know how or when, but she will be the one to collect the debt. From that point on, she begins to plan, not with rage that burns out, but with patience that hardens. She watches the worst masters, learns their habits, notes what they fear, what they hide behind their authority. She builds quiet connections beyond her own hacienda through traders and coded messages carried in songs the overseers dismiss as noise. She listens more than she speaks. She remembers everything. 1710 brings the tragedy that accelerates it all. Miguel falls ill with a respiratory sickness. Fever consumes him for weeks, and Don Rodrigo forbids any assistance. On this land, the enslaved must recover on their own or disappear. Esperanza watches her son weaken, watches his brightness dim until he dies in her arms after whispering, "Mama, why does it hurt so much to live?" She sheds no tears at the burial in the slave cemetery, a desolate patch of ground where bodies are lowered into unmarked earth. That night, alone, something finally breaks inside her, and something more dangerous is born: cold, calculated, relentless determination. She is no longer dreaming of revenge. She is preparing a reckoning, and she gives herself 6 years to perfect every detail. Miguel's death marks the end of the victim and the beginning of a woman with nothing left to lose. The pain of watching a child die because cruelty as policy can move mountains, bend history, and turn the oppressed into instruments of relentless justice. The months that follow are quiet, but radical. Esperanza keeps working, outwardly compliant. Yet those who know her see the shift. Eyes that measure everything, hands that move with deliberate precision, a way of hearing every conversation as if filing it away. Joaquin, a worker from the mill, notices first. "Your eyes have changed, sister. Before, I saw pain and hope. Now I see purpose." The faint smile that touches her mouth confirms it. In September 1710, 3 months after Miguel's death, her planning becomes systematic. Her objective is not a blind act that ends with her death, but a calculated operation aimed at those most responsible for the machinery of suffering. She has identified 14 landowners whose names surface in the most horrific stories. Don Rodrigo sits at the top, her master, and the architect of punishments designed to humiliate as much as harm. Methods meant to force families to participate in their own destruction. Others are infamous in their own ways. One owner is known for treating human pain as experiments, constantly devising new ways to control without killing. Another is obsessed with purity, tearing families apart and reshaping lives like property. Another turns punishment into public theater, inviting others to watch as if it were entertainment. Esperanza records these names. She records their patterns. She waits. The other 10 represented variations on the same theme, beings who lost connection with humanity, who turned cruelty into refined art, who reveled in the suffering of others. Each name carried a catalog of specific atrocities that Esperanza memorized with accounting precision. This investigation is based on documents from the General Archive of the Indies. Subscribe to learn the outcome and share if you believe others should know this real story. To execute the plan, she needs detailed information, routines, weaknesses, fears of each target. She establishes a network of contacts across all haciendas using itinerant merchants as unwitting messengers, carrying coded letters that appear to be home remedies but contain vital intelligence. Catalina becomes a primary source. Through her, Esperanza learns about regular meetings of landowners, travel plans, drinking habits, and infidelities that could be used for blackmail. Every detail is precious, every piece of information a part of the puzzle, but the most important element is knowledge of natural poisons. She becomes an obsessive student of lethal botany. She learns that barbazolita bark with chicha produces gradual paralysis without affecting consciousness. Amazonian mushrooms induce unconsciousness, simulating death for hours. The most valuable knowledge comes from Bonifacio, an elderly slave from Chocó who was a healer before being captured. He teaches her the sleep of the righteous, a mixture that induces deep but reversible unconsciousness, maintaining vital functions while eliminating movement. A perfect poison for someone seeking justice, not immediate death. During 1711 to 1712, she perfects her network and knowledge. She establishes communication with slaves from the 14 haciendas using African songs that overseers interpret as nostalgia, but which transmit strategic information. The songs speak of a great harvest to come, a day when the sun will turn to fire, a feast where enemies will dance together. She also perfects the acquisition and preparation of poisons. She develops methods to dry and preserve toxic plants, combine them in exact proportions, and mask them with familiar flavors. She becomes an expert in dosages, how much to sedate without killing, how much to paralyze while maintaining consciousness, how much to awaken at the exact moment. 1713. She tests her knowledge. Don Esteban Vasquez, a visiting landowner from Cañete, known for his cruelty to slaves, dines at Don Rodrigo's house. Esperanza adds a small experimental dose to his wine. He spends the night with violent vomiting and diarrhea, but survives. This confirms that her calculations are correct. She can precisely control the effects. April 1714, a crucial event. She learns from Catalina that the 14 landowners have established an annual tradition. Every June 24th, St. John's Day, they gather at San Pedro for a celebration that combines business and entertainment, the only occasion where they are all together simultaneously. That night, she calculates, she has exactly 2 years and 2 months to perfect every detail. A single opportunity for success with no possibility of correction. June 24th, 1716. Either the revenge will be perfect, or she will die trying. The decision is made, the date marked. Preparations have begun. Somewhere in the valley, 14 men continue torturing slaves, unaware that their days are numbered with mathematical precision. A woman who lost everything is patiently building her revenge, and it will be as perfect as it is terrible. April 1714. The revelation about the annual June 24th meeting transforms the fantasy of revenge into a military project of surgical precision. 2 years and 2 months to orchestrate the most complex operation ever executed by slaves in America. Every day counts. Every detail could be the difference between perfect justice and total failure. The fundamental problem: simultaneously neutralizing 14 armed men surrounded by guards accustomed to violence. The answer lies in years of accumulated knowledge, perfect poison applied at the perfect moment, followed by an execution that would turn them into symbols of terror for all the cruel. Esperanza transforms her informal network into a clandestine organization that would impress the most sophisticated conspirators. She uses African songs for regular communication with slaves from the 14 haciendas, expanding her network to include workers from allied plantations, merchants, and domestic slaves in Lima with information about urban activities. The code is a masterpiece of simplicity. The river sings when rain comes means a landowner plans to travel. Mother Moon cries for lost children indicates an execution or severe punishment. The golden corn grows high towards the sky is a sign that preparations are going according to plan. Joaquin becomes her main lieutenant. His experience with machinery provides access to essential tools for pyre construction. His knowledge of metallurgy allows him to design special chains impossible to break for men weakened by poisons. Catalina contributes routines of the master's house, but her most valuable contribution is access to Don Rodrigo's library. While cleaning, she memorizes passages on medicine and botany that confirm knowledge of toxic plants. Also, information on each landowner's culinary preferences, crucial for deciding how to administer the poisons. Building the network requires extreme caution. One error, one betrayal, and not only Esperanza, but all collaborators would die. She develops security protocols, danger signals, escape routes, a cell system where each group knows only direct contacts, never the full structure. The selection of collaborators takes months. She must identify slaves who hate enough, but can keep secrets under torture, act with composure under pressure, and follow complex orders without questioning. Of hundreds of regional slaves, only 53 meet the criteria. These will become the executors of the most perfect revenge in colonial America. The collection and preparation of poisons require a full year. She needs quantities to neutralize 14 men, considering that some may have greater resistance, with dosages calculated according to body weight and reserves for unforeseen circumstances. Barbasco is obtained through a slave from San Isidro, near the Rimac, where it grows abundantly. Casca de Anta arrives from the north with merchants unaware they are transporting death. Amazonian mushrooms are more difficult. They require contacts with slaves from jungle expeditions who know the lethal secrets of Peruvian nature. Each plant is processed according to specific methods, dried in the sun for exact days, ground with granite stones that do not contaminate, mixed in proportions tested on animals. She develops progressive tests, rats, pigs, finally a dying dog with a full dose to confirm exact effects. The final poison is a lethal work of art, a combination that induces loss of consciousness in 30 minutes, maintains vital functions for 6 hours, and leaves victims paralyzed and unable to resist upon waking. The mixture is odorless, tasteless with red wine. Effects are irreversible once absorption begins. During 1715, preparations intensify. The pyre must be built with specific materials, thorn charcoal that burns slowly, maintaining high temperature, and carob wood with intense but controllable flames. A stone structure to concentrate heat upwards. Secret construction, moonless night, a hidden but accessible location. Joaquin designs an ingenious system. The pyre as an underground oven with natural chimneys for perfect combustion control. Stones transported one by one for months, camouflaged as repair material, accumulated charcoal mixed with normal mill reserves. The most complex aspect is timing coordination. Everything in perfect sequence. Poisons during dinner, time for them to take effect, transfer of unconscious bodies, preparation of the fire, execution when they regain consciousness to be fully aware of what is happening. Esperanza calculates exactly 7 hours from dinner to ignition, 30 minutes for full effect, 2 hours for transfer and preparation, 1 hour for final preparations, 3 hours of waiting until they awaken, 30 final minutes to regain sufficient consciousness before the flames consume them. General rehearsals begin in March 1716. Using sacks of corn weighing as much as adult men, conspirators practice the nocturnal transfer from the master's house to the pyre. They time movements, identify points where noise could alert guards, and develop techniques to move bodies without injuries that would awaken the victims. Catalina practices poisoning with common wine and harmless herbs, perfecting the technique for serving cups where each landowner receives an exact dose according to body weight. She has memorized not only drinking preferences, but also habits. Who drinks quickly, who sips slowly, who mixes with water. May 1716, final test. Using a smaller dose, she administers the poison to a pig of similar weight to Don Rodrigo. Perfect results: loss of consciousness in 28 minutes, complete paralysis for 5 hours and 40 minutes, gradual recovery maintaining muscular immobilization. The pig survives, confirming perfectly calculated doses. June 20th, 1716, 4 days prior, a unique meeting of all leaders in the slave cemetery among anonymous graves under a new moon that concealed faces. Each confirms their part is ready, poisons prepared, pyre constructed, collaborators in position. Everything is ready for the most perfect revenge in American history. That night, Esperanza cannot sleep, not from nerves, but from a strange sensation not experienced since Miguel's death: hope. For the first time in 6 years, she feels that perhaps justice exists in this world. In 4 days, she will know for sure. June 23, 1716. The sun sets as Hacienda San Pedro prepares for the most important celebration of the year. Don Rodrigo has spent weeks organizing the annual Feast of St. John, an event combining business, social ostentation, and the cruelest imaginable entertainments. He does not suspect he is organizing his own execution. The master's house shines with Potosi silver chandeliers, Persian tapestries, Chinese porcelain dinnerware. The central courtyard has been transformed into a ballroom with mulatto musicians and tables laden with delicacies that contrast brutally with the slaves' daily gruel. The 14 guests arrive during the afternoon with retinues of bodyguards and servants. Antonio de Ulloa from La Esperanza in a golden carriage pulled by 6 mules, sounding horns as if he were a European king. Fernando de Cáceres with an escort of 15 armed men, free mulattoes who would kill without hesitation to defend his fortune. Diego de Alvarado brings 3 adolescent slaves recently arrived from Angola as gifts for nighttime entertainment. Esperanza observes from the kitchen where she works with 12 other slave women preparing the banquet. Her hands cut vegetables with her usual precision, but her eyes register every movement, every detail that could affect her plan. She has waited 6 years for this night. Nothing can fail. Catalina moves among the tables with an agility that belies her 60 years. She will serve the landowners directly, administering exact doses calculated for each victim. In her hands, she carries crystal vials marked with signs only she understands, each containing death dosed according to body weight and estimated resistance. This reconstruction is based on real historical documents. If this is impacting you, share so more people can learn this story and tell us what you think in the comments. Dinner begins at 8 p.m. when Lima's bells announce the end of the day. The 14 sit around a rectangular mahogany table, illuminated by hundreds of candles, creating a festive atmosphere. Conversation flows between business, sugar prices, cultivation techniques, plantation expansion, and tales of creative punishments applied to rebellious slaves. Don Rodrigo steers the conversation to his favorite topics: new torture techniques to maintain discipline, racial improvement experiments through forced breeding. His guests listen with professional interest, exchanging advice as if discussing crops. The key is not to kill them too quickly, explains Antonio de Ulloa, savoring llama stew with Cusco spices. A dead slave doesn't produce, but a terrorized one produces double. The art is in the perfect balance between pain and productivity. The others nod, mentally noting the described techniques. At 9:30 p.m., the crucial moment arrives: roasted lamb with yellow potatoes and chili, accompanied by the red wine that will seal the diner's fate. Catalina discreetly approaches Esperanza, who hands her a special tray with 14 vials of poison, each corresponding to a specific diner. The system is ingenious. Each cup is marked with notches that only Catalina identifies. 1 mark for Don Rodrigo, a heavier dose for being a larger man. 2 marks for Antonio, 3 for Fernando, and so on. There can be no errors. Each dose is mathematically calculated. As Catalina serves the poisoned wine with the dexterity of 40 years as a domestic slave, the landowners continue their conversation, oblivious to receiving their death sentence in Venetian goblets. Fernando recounts with laughter how he forced a slave mother to choose which of her 2 children would be executed for alleged theft. Diego describes a new branding technique with decorative designs on the faces of young female slaves. To the prosperity of our haciendas and the perpetual mission of our workforce. Don Rodrigo proposes, raising his glass in a toast that will be remembered as the most ironic ever uttered. The 14 goblets are raised. Red wine gleams under the candles like liquid blood. Each landowner drinks deeply, celebrating domination over thousands of lives. Esperanza observes from the shadows as each enemy consumes their dose of death. She sees Don Rodrigo drink avidly, Antonio slowly savoring, unaware that each drop brings him closer to his fate, Fernando emptying his glass and asking for more, unconscious of having sealed his doom. The poisons are a chemical masterpiece, a combination dosed to act in precise phases. First, a slight euphoria that will make them talkative and confident. Then, gradual drowsiness attributed to the wine. Finally, complete loss of consciousness that will leave them vulnerable for the final phase. 10:15 p.m. First symptoms. Don Rodrigo complains of excessive heat, loosening the collar of his silk shirt. Antonio mentions feeling strangely relaxed. Fernando laughs louder at jokes that are not particularly funny. None suspect what is happening in their bodies. 10:30 p.m., evident drowsiness, heavy eyelids, slurred voices, slow gestures. "This wine is stronger than usual," comments Diego, unaware that it is not alcohol affecting his nervous system. "It must be an exceptionally potent vintage," Don Rodrigo replies, his words beginning to slur. Esperanza signals Joaquin, who is waiting with 20 slaves in the backyard. Time to position everything for the transfer. The pyre is ready, constructed months ago in an open field behind the sugarcane fields, invisible from the house, but perfectly accessible. 11 p.m. The first one loses consciousness. Sebastian de Herrera, the smallest, for whom the poison would act fastest. His head drops, and he begins to snore while his companions joke about his low tolerance for alcohol. He is completely unconscious, not asleep. One by one they succumb. 11:15, 3 more unconscious. 11:30, only 6 are conscious but with severe, evident intoxication. Clumsy movements, incomprehensible words, no reaction capacity. Don Rodrigo is the last to fall, exactly as calculated for being the largest and strongest. 11:45 p.m. His head hits the table with a dull thud, marking the end of dinner and the beginning of the final phase of the boldest plan ever executed by slaves in American territory. Catalina gives the agreed-upon signal, 3 chimes with a spoon against a crystal goblet. A sound awaited for years, a sign that the moment of justice has arrived. In minutes, the courtyard fills with dark figures emerging as avengers. Joaquin and his men work with military efficiency. They have practiced for months. Each knows which body to carry, by what route to transport it, in what position to place it on the pyre. The 14 are lifted like sacks of corn, unconscious but living bodies carried on the shoulders of men who suffered under their whips for decades. 2 a.m. on June 24th. Everything is ready. The 14 lie unconscious on the pyre, which will be their tomb, while 53 slaves form a silent circle. Esperanza stands in the center holding the torch that will ignite the fire of the most perfect revenge in American history. She must wait 3 more hours according to calculations. The poisons will gradually begin to lose effect. The landowners will regain enough consciousness to understand what is happening, feel the heat approaching, and experience the absolute terror they inflicted on thousands for decades. Esperanza looks at the Andean stars and thinks of Miguel, Carmen, Tomasa, Aurelio, all who died under the cruelty of these men. She thinks of mothers who watched their children die, fathers forced to whip their own kin, women systematically raped, children branded before they could walk. Revenge is about to be completed. All that remains is to light the fire and wait for the executioners to become victims, for the powerful to experience absolute impotence, for the cruel to know the meaning of terror. Justice, after centuries of waiting, is about to burn like flames that will consume the enemies of humanity. 4:30 a.m., June 24th. 1716. Esperanza lights the torch she has awaited for 6 years. The fire dances, thirsty for justice, casting shadows over 53 slaves who form a perfect circle around the pyre where their oppressors lie. The 14 landowners show the first signs of recovery. Groans, involuntary movements, deeper breaths. Esperanza calculated the moment with precision, conscious enough to understand what is happening, but too weak to resist. Don Rodrigo is the first to open his eyes. His confused gaze focuses on Esperanza's face with the lit torch. "You," he whispers in a hoarse voice. "What have you done, black woman?" "What I should have done a long time ago," she calmly replies. "What you taught us with every whip, every brand from a red-hot iron, every child murdered for amusement. I will teach you what it feels like to be completely defenseless." The others regain consciousness and terror spreads as they understand their situation. They are tied with chains forged by Joaquin, impossible to break for victims weakened by poisoning. Antonio de Ulloa cries like a child. Please, I have family. I will give you freedom, money, whatever you want. Like the agreement you made with Maria Guadalupe when she asked for food for her sick child, Esperanza replies. You never made agreements, you only knew the language of violence. Today, you will learn that we speak it too. This execution is documented in real historical archives. Share this video so more people can learn about these events that changed the history of resistance in America. Fernando de Cáceres cries out desperately, "We are Spanish citizens. If you kill us, armies will come to avenge us." My people are already dying every day under your whips, she responds with a cold smile. At least now you will die knowing that your executioners paid the full price. Diego de Alvarado struggles against his chains. Guards! Soldiers! Help! Your guards are sleeping soundly, Joaquin explains. The Chicha had coca and valerian to keep them unconscious until midday. There will be no rescues, only justice. Esperanza takes thorn charcoal, the same kind extracted by 5-year-old slave children. This charcoal was extracted by the hands of children who worked 16 hours in tunnels where many died. Today, it will take you to the hell you created. In Africa, my grandmother taught me that the spirits of the unjustly killed do not rest until justice is restored. I have heard their voices for 14 years, Miguel asking for revenge, Carmen demanding justice, Tomas insisting that those who killed him pay. The first flames lick the base as she brings the torch to the soaked charcoal. The fire grows with inexorable determination. They feel the heat approaching. It is the same heat thousands experienced when they were branded with red-hot irons. 5:15 a.m. Flames reach bodies. Screams transform into shrieks of agony audible for kilometers. Esperanza remains motionless, her face illuminated by the fire devouring men who destroyed thousands of lives. The screams last exactly 18 minutes. 5:33 a.m. on June 24th, 1716. The 14 cruelest landowners of the Viceroyalty have been executed by the justice they created. Smoke rises, carrying the message that perfect revenge is possible when planned with patience and executed with precision. When the flames extinguish, Esperanza orders the ashes scattered in the Rimac River. Not even their remains will find rest in sacred ground. The chained woman has become a legend, a symbol, proof that oppression cannot be eternal when someone is willing to pay any price for justice. Noon on June 24th. The smoke visible from Lima rises like an accusing finger. The San Pedro guards awaken and discover that their masters have mysteriously disappeared. The scene defies comprehension. Charred remains of 14 bodies, broken chains, total absence of slaves who should be working. Captain Don Gaspar de Acuna, a veteran of European wars, examines the scene. This was a perfectly coordinated military operation. Whoever organized this had knowledge of military tactics, access to materials, and absolute discipline among a large number of participants. Viceroy Don Diego Ladrón de Guevara receives the news during Mass in Lima. His disbelief transforms into pure terror. If slaves manage to simultaneously murder 14 of the most powerful landowners, what prevents them from doing the same to him? Paranoia seizes the entire colonial ruling class. The official investigation begins under the Grand Inquisitor, Fray Antonio de Castro. More than 200 slaves are arrested and subjected to refined tortures, but the results are frustrating. No one knows anything, as if 14 landowners had been executed by ghosts. Esperanza had foreseen this. The 53 conspirators disappeared following escape routes planned for years. The slaves who remained genuinely knew nothing, protected by a system of sealed cells. The Viceroy decrees a maximum security ordinance, severe restrictions on slave movement, prohibition of gatherings of more than 5, a system of informants offering freedom for information about conspiracies. The economic consequences are devastating. The haciendas represented 30% of the Viceroyalty's sugar production. Their terrified heirs abandon plantations and flee to Spain. Production falls by 50%, affecting the finances of the Spanish crown from Lima to Madrid. But the most important consequences are psychological. For the first time, slaves have shown they can organize and execute operations that terrorize oppressors. The invulnerability of the ruling class has been destroyed forever. Control methods are intensified to inhumane limits, but paradoxically confirm what the execution demonstrated: that the slave system is maintained solely by terror, and when that terror is reversed, the system collapses. News of the San Juan fire spreads throughout colonial America. In Venezuela, slaves sing about a woman who made enemies burn. In Mexico, stories circulate about the Black Woman of Fire. In Brazil, they whisper about the terrible mother who collected all blood debts. 6 months later, the Inquisitor admits in a confidential report that the investigation failed. The perpetrators have disappeared, but what is most concerning is that the entire slave population protects them with unbreakable silence. Unbreakable. This woman not only killed 14 landowners, she killed the peace of mind of all of us who live off slavery. Esperanza had not executed personal revenge. She had executed a political act that forever changed power relations in colonial America. She had created a precedent that would inspire uprisings for decades, demonstrating that perfect revenge is not a dream, but a concrete possibility. The following years are marked by a radical transformation between oppressors and oppressed throughout the continent. Esperanza's story transforms into myth, symbol, and inspiring force that fuels slave resistance for generations. What became of Esperanza? Documents lose her trace after the dawn of June 24th. Authorities never captured her despite rewards equivalent to the price of 100 slaves. She disappeared into the Andean air, leaving only the ashes of her enemies as evidence. Records from the convent of Santa Clara in Cusco mention the arrival of a woman who sought refuge in July 1716. The description matches Esperanza, and she demonstrated knowledge of herbal medicine. She lived there for 3 years before disappearing, leaving a note. Justice does not rest until all innocents are safe. The most supported theory suggests she reached the Quilombos of Brazil. Portuguese records mention the appearance of an extraordinary leader, Mãe Fogo, Mother Fire, who organized the most successful expansion of free communities, sheltering over 10,000 fugitive slaves and challenging colonial power for decades. This real story teaches us about human resistance in the face of injustice. Subscribe for more stories that change the world. Share if you believe others should know this story, and tell us what you think about Esperanza's acts, justice or revenge. Her legacy as a symbol is meticulously documented. Inquisition archives are full of slaves arrested for singing about the Woman of the Holy Fire. In 1724, the Jamaican Rebellion was inspired by an African woman who burned white devils. In 1733, slaves in Stono copied her methods of sealed cells and natural poisons. In 1741, New York discovered a conspiracy inspired by an African mother who collected blood debts. Esperanza's methods were copied by continental resistance movements. Her organization into sealed cells, knowledge of natural poisons, and long-term planning inspired conspiracies that achieved impossible goals. But the most important legacy was the psychological change. Before 1716, slavery was sustained by the belief that their mission was natural, that Africans were incapable of effectively challenging Europeans. The perfect execution destroyed that illusion forever. The Jesuit, Father Miguel de Santa Maria, confirms, "We no longer see resigned acceptance in the anger of slaves. Now we see calculation, planning. They know we are vulnerable, that they can organize, that perfect revenge is possible. The woman from Lima killed the peace of mind of all of us who live off the oppression of others." By 1750, the slave system showed structural exhaustion. Rebellions became so sophisticated that maintaining slaves was more costly than free laborers. Esperanza's techniques, perfected by generations, created constant terror that transformed the entire colonial economic system. Esperanza of Lima did not just burn 14 men that dawn in 1716. She burned the idea that oppression could be eternal, that the powerful were invulnerable, that justice was the exclusive privilege of those with weapons and money. Today, over 300 years later, her fire continues to burn in the memory of those who fight for justice. Her revenge was perfect not for being cruel, but for being just. It was admirable not for being violent, but for being necessary. Her story teaches us that true revolution sometimes arrives silently, planned by a woman who lost everything and decided that the price of justice was worth paying. Her legacy endures because she demonstrated that the oppressed can be as relentless as their oppressors when they decide they have suffered enough. In present-day Lima, the Andean wind still carries an echo of that night when justice manifested as purifying fire. Esperanza demonstrated that even in the most perfect hell, victims can become judges, and the fire of just revenge can burn with an intensity that forever transforms the world.